Hello everyone and welcome to the Hobby Guard, where we violently, shamelessly, aggressively nerd out about our passions and hobbies, and that is precisely what I will be doing today, as I perhaps shoot myself in the foot by jumping out into such an inflammatory, particularly controversial topic, and with my channel being so early. But just before we jump right into the discussion, I gotta make a few disclaimers. I just want you to understand right off the bat what type of video this is gonna be. First of all, first disclaimer, this is my stick. So every time I say or too much or I catch myself saying it too much, I gotta whack myself. Sorry about that, I'm just trying to make videos more fluid, teach myself to talk better so that it is less boring for everyone watching. So just so you're not taken aback if you hear me just whacking myself in the hand like a dog. That's just how I learn. Ask my wife if you don't believe me. That being said, the other disclaimer that I want to make clear right out about it in this video is the purpose of the channel. This is not, regardless of what you may think due to the name of the channel, this is not a gatekeeping channel. Now, if you're unaware of the term gatekeeping, usually it's meant when, for example, fans of Warhammer 40k or any other hobby or IP or whatever gatekeep their hobby to keep certain people out. That's not necessarily what I want this channel to be, and I bring that up because when I was floating around channel names with a friend and I said Hobbyguard, he said, "Hey, but that may sound like..." That's exactly how he speaks, by the way. "That may sound like you're trying to gatekeep people out of their hobbies." He said something like that. And I just like the name so much that that's a risk I was fully willing to take. But no, I am trying to guard the time, the value of our hobbies and the things that me and others feel passionate about. And I'm certainly fighting an uphill battle, specifically with this hobby of mine being Warhammer 40k, because it is well known that GW Games Workshop is a publicly traded company, and thus it's gonna do what it has to do to give back to their investors, to increase the profit from their investors. Now, that is a bittersweet pill to swallow, because on one hand, the hobby that you love gets more mainstream, gets more public, gets more exposure, and thus with more exposure and more profit factor, you get cooler stuff, right? So now we have a bunch of animated, officially licensed animated shows and episodes and short movies, basically, and short series, and we get so much more video games that we used to before. Whereas way back in the day, Warhammer was, I would still consider it a niche hobby, but it was always sort of an underdog, specifically compared to bigger sci-fi IPs like, let's say, Star Trek, the OG, or Star Wars. And now, I was a huge fan of Star Wars myself back in the day, and I saw that IP just run into the ground. And when I say a huge fan, I don't mean like, oh, I was aware of the lore or whatever. No, basically Star Wars, I had a very emotional, personal connection to that story and to that narrative and those movies and those comics and those books and those video games, because it just was such a huge part of my growing up, of my infancy, so to speak. To the point that I would grab strength and inspiration from those stories that I love so much when facing some of the hardest moments in my life. And I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, even risky life or death situations. That's, or even subtler things like learning about values and just growing up. So that was an important IP for me, and right now it just became completely unrelatable to me, right? So obviously some of it is just me being old, becoming grumpier and less satisfied with the newer stuff, and from what I hear, that's just a thing that happens in life. The older you get, the more you're gonna look at all new stuff and be like, the old stuff was better. But again, just a disclaimer, this video is not gonna be me just shaking my fist at new stuff bad, old stuff better. And since we're talking about that, right away I wanna say also, this isn't gonna be also a gatekeeping video like I was mentioning previously. This isn't going to be about, oh, there should not be certain additions to the lore of Warhammer, to the IP, to keep certain people out. These people do not deserve to be integrated. And this isn't necessarily gonna be a culture war video either. I'm not gonna be like, do not listen to the wokies, or do not listen to the ultra-based right-wing shots. Because honestly, to me, all of those things go back to the same idea of contaminating the hobby, contaminating the lore, contaminating the narratives. Because I will try, no matter where you stand. I know most people stand somewhere in this debate, and no matter where you stand, I will do my damn best to try to convince you that it is best for everyone, that neither your side nor the opposing side, that no side gets what they want in the end, for the reasons that you may want. Let me try to be clearer in that sense. I don't want... Okay, let me... I just have so many ideas in my head. I did write some bullet points here to try to keep me on track, but that's... I already completely disregarded them, so I'll just look now and then to the side here, just to take a look at what I might be missing, but that's long gone. I am too passionate about these things, and I do start rambling, so I do apologize. But let me start a conversation, and mainly I will be giving a few examples in this video, mainly the changes to the lore in regards to the female custodies, but that's just gonna be my first example of many, and again I will try to switch you over to my side to convince you why, not necessarily the fact that this was done, but the way it was done was a terrible thing. I will also try to mention Primaris Marines and new ethnicities being included in certain Marine chapters that were very, traditionally speaking, since the start, very ethnic specific. So yeah, I am walking a minefield right now. I'll be walking on glass. I don't know if that's an accurate use of that term, but let's just jump right into the conversation, I guess. I'll begin said conversation by saying I realize we are talking about a company that is trying to sell you overpriced toy soldiers. Okay? It's one thing I gotta make extremely clear. I realize that GW's purpose, Games Workshop's purpose, is to sell more models, to sell more miniatures, to make more money, to sell more Warhammer Plus subscriptions for whatever that's worth. And I do realize that in this topic, some people jump to conclusions saying, with the example of the introduction of female custodies, saying, well, if you don't want female custodies, that means you just don't want female representation in the hobby. And unfortunately, that statement proves true for a lot of people who disagree with this idea. Some people definitely don't want women in this hobby, and their fears are not entirely unfounded. I'll explain that later, but I am not one of those people. I do have one female friend that I take pride in specifically dragging into the hobby, and now she spent ungodly amounts of money, probably more than that was wise for her to do into the hobby. She didn't end up feeling attracted to 40k. She ended up buying Age of Sigmar miniatures, Skaven, whatever. I did try to drag my own wife into it. I did buy her a Tyranid Force, and she, to my surprise, quite enjoyed painting them, and she had a good time doing that, even though she's completely opposed to ever playing, and I cannot blame her for it. But my point is, I'm not diametrically opposed. I'm not completely opposed to the idea of women entering the hobby. What I am opposed to is the idea of any group of people, let's not talk about groups of people, because that's just simplifying things. And I said, whoever just enters a hobby with the specific idea to change it without first taking the time to understand what it is that makes it special. And in this particular and specific case, I don't even think that most higher ups in GW understand what they had. Again, I know that they're just trying to sell quote unquote toy soldiers, but it is so much more that much more than that, sorry. And I could go into the details of all the experiences that the hobby gives you, all the creative outlet that it represents, just how you assemble your miniatures. I don't have any miniatures near me. I do have my armies back there, but most of them I kit bash and I change them and I tweak how they come in the box, how the instruction manual is asking me to assemble them, because that's part of the creativity. And then you have to choose an identity for your miniatures. And we got all these books that we can choose from, which display all the different chapters in case of Space Marines or whatever, all the different factions. And you have the freedom to go and create your own. So that exposure to creativity is just amazing. It is an amazing thing to cultivate. Further than that, there's the intellectual effort of learning to play. And further than that, a step further than that, let's say, it's the social value of walking into a store with your painted miniatures and your books, trying to understand the rules and ask a more experienced person, hey, can I have a first game with you? And a further point from that is just creating your group of friends that all share the same hobby. And so my point is, there's a lot of value. But specifically today, I will be talking about the lore, the narrative. And I want to focus on that because I can only make a video so long. So I don't want to talk too much about too many things, because I do tend to do that. And I am trying to, at some point, make this channel somewhat profitable. So I got to stick to some standards of entertainment and attention spans. Sorry about that big pause. I'm just this is a huge topic, and again, I am walking a minefield here, so I'm trying to find the most gentle way to approach it. A couple of years ago, and I'm bringing this up again for a couple of reasons. I will start by saying why this came up, why I want to talk about this today of all days. About a week ago, I read the book Ashes of the Imperium, which, as far as I am concerned, is the first official mention in a Black Library book, not in the lore, obviously, but in a Black Library book, of a female custodes. And it felt a bit jarring. I mentioned that in my review of the book Ashes of the Imperium. It felt a bit jarring because we read the entire Horus Heresy, which started coming out in the early 2000s. And the custodes have played a huge role in the Horus Heresy. And so far, there had never been female custodes. There had never been a character that was addressed as a female custodes. Until a couple of years ago, when GW just dropped the bomb on us and said, well, there are now female custodes, because it got randomly mentioned in a short story. And was it a short story, or I think it was, I don't even remember. It was either a codex or a white dwarf, something like that. And when people started reacting towards it, some were complaining, some were happy, but everyone was equally asking for clarification. An official account of GW just said there have always been female custodes. And just like that, the lore was changed. This is far from the first time that they do that. Still hurtful, still jarring, and I still think it was definitely the wrong way to go about it. Now, as I mentioned it before, this particular topic of a conversation is not new. This has been happening in the lore for many, many years, and it's been happening over and over again. But I want to explain, perhaps from a different point of view, or at least from my own point of view, why this is a recipe for disaster for the narratives that we love. And why do I get a say on this? Well, I, like many of you perhaps, have spent a stupid amount of money consuming these books, just feeling engaged with this product, with this lore. Now, that's what I mean when I say GW perhaps isn't aware as a company, or some people in the company, let's say, some of the people making these narrative decisions are not necessarily aware of what they have in their hands in regards to literary value. Now, that might even be a meme, because some Warhammer books are considered cringe or edgy or just literary bad, and we're talking about an IP that has hundreds of books written in their universe. And that is, well, my argument is that those books connect with people for different reasons, but psychologically speaking, and for sometimes even philosophically speaking, as silly as that may seem, they enrich people's lives via the connection that we make through those books. I am not kidding about this. I have gone through some of the toughest points in my life, being aided, just listening in my earbuds to a Warhammer book, or re-listening a specific Warhammer book, just because I know that it will give me strength, that it will give me courage to read these stories set in the fictional distant future of these heroes, we could call some of them, who are just fighting against these impossible odds. And that is the goal that I will be focused, the goal that GW has on their hands, that I will be focusing about in this video. Why I think there shouldn't have been female custodies? Well, first of all, what are the custodies in a more meta way of looking at things? The custodies and the Space Marines, which female Space Marines might happen someday at this point. At this point, I don't even, like, it might happen, and there's pretty much nothing we can do about it. Again, it being a publicly traded company and everything. But archetypically speaking, the figures in Warhammer, the factions, the characters, the Primarchs, for example, the Space Marine chapters, the Sisters of Battle, the Mechanicum, they all represent, they have value, archetypical value, in the collective unconscious of the people who read that and the people who write it. Now, I don't want to get too Jungian with this, but if you know a little about, if you read or heard something about Jungian psychology, there's this idea that the collective unconscious is a subconscious, it's like the warp, let me put it that way, the warp, and it is shared, our ideas, emotions, our struggles, our inner shadows, our entire self, hidden self, that's just, again, hidden or unrecognized by ourselves, by our outer self, by our egos. We all have these ideas, these hidden or repressed desires, and that gets projected into a collective unconscious, and some people, in this case some writers, grasp onto that like little antennas. They feed from that to create, to write books, to write stories, to create art, etc., etc., etc. Now, whether you believe or don't believe in that, I definitely am not, I don't have the credentials to try to convince you either way. It's just something to me that I've experienced, and it makes a lot of sense as someone who is also creative, as well as a huge consumer of creative art, basically. Creative media is the word I was looking for. And I say all of that because I believe that the Custodies are an archetype. The Space Marines are an archetype. What do I mean by archetype? Archetypes are these symbols in the collective unconscious that represent collective ideas, collective concepts, rather. They are the forms that these subconscious, subjective concepts and ideas might take. Now, if I tell you, well, what the concept of masculinity, of stoicism, of battle-hardened masculinity, with the purpose, the unique purpose of war and fighting, where would that come from? Well, it is ingrained in our DNA. It is ingrained specifically for men, not exclusively, but mostly for men, it is ingrained in us. It's not necessarily a societal thing, it's not necessarily a cultural thing, it's not necessarily a genetic thing, but it's kind of all of the above, really. And how do I know this? Because I'm a dude. And since I was a young kid, as opposed as my mom was to me consuming any form of violence in media, I just had these waking dreams of great battles and great fights, and that's just how the male mind unfolds sometimes. Maybe I'm autistic, I don't know. But that lasted for many, many years. Until this day, I just canalized that into a video game, or a book, or a creative outlet like drawing or playing and things like that. So the Custodes specifically, what archetype do they fulfill? The Custodes specifically fulfill the archetype of a guardian. They're the perfect guardian. Now, traditionally speaking, being a guardian, being a bodyguard, is not something exclusive to men. That is true. But in the 41st millennium, where battle itself is like, these men they're a combination of arcane, eldritch, warp, psychic technology and futuristic, actual, down to the ground, bolts and nuts and circuits and DNA engineering technology. So all these things come together to create the perfect bodyguard, the perfect custodian. And the fact that in the lore they had always been men doesn't matter. The point is, it made sense that they were men. Specifically, traditionally speaking, in the lore, they were the sons of kings or leaders that were defeated by the emperor as he was uniting Terra, right? Now, the Space Marines also fulfill an archetype, and different Space Marines chapters and factions also fulfill this archetype, because it is not as simple as that. It is a very rich archetype, and it can branch out into many different things. First of all, you have the traitors. Some of them are nihilistic, some of them are rebellious, some of them are just violence, and they just live for the glory of a good scrap. And then you have the loyalists, which they're still violent. They're still some of them just live for the glory of a good scrap, but their different values come in. Perhaps less freedom in the case of the loyalist Space Marines. They have less individuality, less autonomy. They operate psychologically with less autonomy, but that is also an archetype, and it is a comforting archetype for certain parts of our psyche. Because we all have a side that is more rebellious, more independent, like the traitor Space Marines, and we all have a side that is more disciplined, more loyal. It just has different values, and we all have those two sides. There's very interesting experiments, which I don't want to get into because it's way too complicated, but just to prove my point, that when with magnets, you activate or shut down different parts of our brain. I know how wacky this sounds right now. This is gonna be terrible for for my algorithm, but anyways, the algorithm will have no clue where to place this video. When they shut down or activate with magnets different parts of your brain, your values change. The things that you consider more important change. Some people become more traditionalist, more close-minded, more conservative if they shut a specific area of their brain, and that guides them to become more religious, and as well that increases their their suspension of disbelief. So they're more prone to believe in wacky stuff, so to speak. And when you activate the other side of the brain, people become a lot more tolerant, a lot more open-minded, a lot more flexible, but a lot more susceptible, to acknowledging threats. Now, I would love to make a video about how Warhammer is defined by by people who are more prone to the first example that I gave. Let's call it the right side, wink wink, because the people who are more tolerant and more open in Warhammer, traditionally speaking, and that is the point of the entire universe, it doesn't make sense if you will let go of this, which is something that has been happening. The factions, the races, the individuals who were more tolerant, more open-minded, they didn't stagnate, they were more creative, they developed faster, but they also went extinct because the galaxy in the universe of Warhammer 40k is ruthless. It is an exercise in constant war. What would the universe look like? The galaxy, what would it look like if there was constant war, if no one can get along, and each faction that can't get along has good reasons not to get along with the others. Not all are good reasons. But that's sort of the split. And unfortunately, in today's political conversation, that split is... It's impossible that split won't turn political. But that is just something that we have to address. Now, the next question is it wrong to... Well, I won't even get into that question because the video will change. But let's go back to female custodians. I'm sorry. I digress way too much. If female custodians had been added for the simple reason of... Okay, someone creatively, narratively needed female custodians, because otherwise this story wouldn't work. And they definitely have this story that they have to tell of this female archetype, female bodyguard that has to go through this, and we need to tell that story. Well, that's one thing. The only issue with that is that archetype already existed in several different characters, which I love. I don't buy them, I don't collect them, but I don't buy male custodians either. I don't necessarily connect them. That doesn't mean I don't feel a connection to them. But in the Sisters of Silence, for example, the Silent Sisterhood, that archetype already existed there. And it gave birth to some of the coolest and most interesting characters and narratives in the universe. My big issue with that is that it wasn't a lore change that was made out of a creative necessity or narrative necessity. And the problem with that is that it always, doing things like those, just changing the lore, changing the narrative, just to appease a certain part of your, how can I put this, potential consumers or customers, usually doesn't go well. Specifically in this case, it didn't go well. I have not met a single female who was ever... I mean, I'm sure they exist. I'm not... If there's one of them out there watching this, I'm sure they exist. But I've not met a single female that was ever thinking, oh, I would really love to collect female custodians. If only there was... I would love to collect custodians as long as they were female. And I will not buy custodians until there's a female one. I've never met one. And if they are, well, that's my issue with it. You should not come into a hobby expecting it to accommodate you. You should come into a hobby trying to learn why people found this interesting in the first place. If you learn why people found that interesting in the first place and you don't find it interesting, then that is not the hobby for you. I'm sorry, I apologize, but not everything is for everyone. There's a bunch of very, like, for example, Trench Crusade. It's another miniature game with some expansive lore. It's very new. It has some very cool ideas. I really like some of the models, some of the art that comes out of it. It's just not attractive to me at this point in time. It might become later down the road, but there's just not enough for it. Like, there's not enough in it that attracts me at this point. Because of a variety of reasons. I have my reasons. But I'm not gonna jump into that hobby and start demanding, hey, we really need more hopefulness in this hobby, in this narrative, because everything is too grim and I don't like it. Because that will defeat the purpose. No, it is what it is. And I'm just not attracted enough. I don't feel a strong enough connection with those themes that those Trench Crusade players and writers and whatever are doing to start engaging with it. So it is not for me. That is basically the gist of it. There are a bunch of my friends. For example, this friend that I told you about that I dragged into the hobby, she really wants me to watch, what's it called? K-pop Demon Hunters, that new movie that came out. It's funny because we're watching my gameplay of Demon Hunters, Chaos Gate Demon Hunters. But anyways, she really wants me to watch that film. And I know that if I watch that film, it might be a fun film, but I know that I'm not the target audience. So you just gotta know when you're not the target audience of something and just step back. That doesn't mean once you're in it, once you already appreciate it for what it is, you won't have a voice to say what you don't like about it, or what changes you didn't like, or what things you would like to be better, or to be taken more seriously or with more care, because that is precisely what I'm doing, and that is cool. But I already liked the hobby as it was enough to get invested enough. I'm not gonna just come in and start changing everything to appeal me. Now I'm gonna give you a few examples of that. Again, I just don't think people should approach hobbies this way. As in, if I don't feel like I am represented specifically, if this is not specifically pandering to me, then I will not interact with this hobby whatsoever. And I will give a few examples. My 3 favorite Space Marine armies. The Blood Angels, in no specific order. The Blood Angels, the White Scars, and the Dark Angels. I only collect 2 of those out of those 3 because I don't have enough money to collect all 3. Basically, if I had more money, I would collect all 3, and then the Iron Hands, and then a bunch more. God, I love this universe so much. That's how much I love this universe. But yeah, let's jump right in. And I do have some bullet points here that I wanted to read real quick. Okay. This is what I pull out my own ethnicity card. I am of Hispanic descent. I know I don't look it. That's I am Mexican, okay? Every time I say I'm Mexican, the first thing that people say is, you don't look Mexican. And I'm like, oh, really? That's crazy. I lived my whole life in Mexico. I never realized that I look somewhat different than most of the population. But regardless, I am Mexican. There are white Mexicans. Deal with it. And when you look at my ancestry DNA results, you'll see I have a big percentage of indigenous American, specifically Mexican, even though those tribes were Mexicas. I come from a different tribe, but I have a big percentage of descent from that. I am also pale because I do have a lot of European descent because of the Spaniards. That is neither here nor there. I don't care about that. The Blood Angels are gorgeous looking, blonde, perfectly sculpted, white, pale, space knight vampires. The White Scars are Mongol-inspired tribal poet warriors that love to ride on bikes. The Dark Angels are knight-inspired, in the book at least, or in the original Caliban. Now, ethnically speaking, the Dark Angels come from all over the place, but in the original Caliban, and I also love the Heresy Dark Angels, where the Heresy Dark Angels come from, specifically from Caliban and Terra, it is explained that most of them have black hair. Now, I don't have black hair, and I don't have golden blonde hair like the Blood Angels. I don't have any Mongolian in me, I think, well, I guess I have like 0.6%, but that's besides the point. I don't love those characters and those chapters and those factions because of how their ethnicities or their gender, necessarily, represent me. What I love about them is very different. It's from the Dark Angels. I love how they try to uphold their knightly values and their knightly persona. At the same time, they're trying to hide this incredible shame, this generational shame that they carry with them, and they're trying to correct it in secret while outwardly portraying, again, a very knightly persona, a very chivalrous persona. From the Blood Angels, even worse, even more. Actually, one more thing I like about the Dark Angels, and the main reason that I started collecting them, too. The first one, I love the color dark green. The second one is they have ADHD, like me. They don't know exactly what they want to be. Some of them want to ride bikes and fly planes. Some of them just love to wear heavy armor and just walk very slowly towards the enemy, or teleport towards the enemy and punch them with a Terminator armor and a power fist to the face. And some of them are just your run-of-the-mill good old chaps who have a bolter and a blade, and they do what they most. So if you're not aware of the lore of the Dark Angels or their different wings, that's the Death Wing, the Raven Wing, and the Green Wing, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, that's also speaking of ADHD, that's also something that I really love about them. And I could speak for hours about why I love each chapter. For the Blood Angels, well, it's something very similar as well. It's that balance that exists between them, how they are surprisingly empathetic, and I don't want to say humanitarian necessarily, but as a rule, the philosophy that Sanguinius left them is you gotta care for people because the people are the Imperium, and we are here to protect the Imperium and to fight for the Imperium. But they are also cursed with the Red Thirst and the Black Rage eventually. And it is legitimately a curse, because they can't really fight it forever, they can only hold it back. And so what did Sanguinius teach them to do to hold it back? He taught them art. He taught them the virtue of art. And he taught them painting and music and sculpting and poetry and all the fine arts. And that's how the Blood Angels channel and the rage and calm themselves down. And when they actually apply their rage in battle, it is them applying, well, ideally speaking, more than often enough, unfortunately, a Blood Angel falls to the Black Rage or to the Red Thirst. But regardless, when they do let go of the rage willingly, without the rage overtaking them in battle, it is beautiful. It is artistic. It is terrifying. It is that paradoxical combination of opposites I really like. And the White Scars don't get me started on the White Scars. I absolutely love them. I love the vibe that they bring to Warhammer. They are objectively some of the only guys other than the Orcs, but it's objectively one of the only Space Marine chapters that are legit just most of the time having a good time because they just love life. And that's the philosophy that they bring. They bring the freedom of life, the freedom of enjoying every moment. And yes, we exist in a horrible universe. Whatever, dude. Write some poems, practice your calligraphy, practice your bladesmanship, practice your writing, and enjoy, laugh while you fight. Sure, destroy your enemies and collect their heads, but do it with a smile. That is amazing. And I love all those Primarchs for Lionel Johnson, Sanguinius, and Genghis Khan. And I could give you a bunch more examples of that. My point is, I don't need any of those chapters to have Mexicans in them. And why do I bring this whole chapter thing up? Well, there's been quite a few examples of another very ethnic-specific chapter, specifically the Space Wolves, or the Vulca Fenrica, which is not even a chapter that I like. I just don't like what they do with the lore. I don't like what they do with the narrative. But I will use them as an example for many things in this point because, first of all, what I was saying beforehand of, if you don't just like something, don't just jump in there and try to change it so that it appeases you, so that it accommodates you. Just try to understand why people like it. And if you don't like it, then it's just not for you. Well, I really don't like the Space Wolves. Whenever there is a Space Wolf characters, there's been a few examples where I'm like, there's been a few examples in the books or whatever, in the lore, where I tolerate them. Sometimes, may I dare say, even enjoy them a little. But for the most part, I am rolling my eyes all the way to the back of my head because they just don't fit in this narrative, in this theme, this vibe that I have going in my head while I'm reading one of those books, and then a Space Wolf comes in and talks like a fantasy, bad-written barbarian, not even a Viking. Oh, if only there were more like space Vikings, but that's the original idea, right? Anyways, I don't want to turn this into a critique of the Space Wolves, but that's my point. I just don't collect them. I don't try to change them. They have a bunch of fans, Space Wolf fans. Some of them I've met, and they're extremely hilarious people. I really like to hang out with them. They're fun. I have nothing against them, so I'm not gonna jump into the lore that they like, the chapters that they like, and change it so it appeases me. And I'm not gonna come here with my history pedant glasses and be like, hey, actually Vikings never spoke like that, and they didn't act like that, and they were actually smarter, not like your dumb dogs, furries, whatever they are. Because they will be like, dude, don't be that guy. Who cares? Anyways. Traditionally speaking, the Wolves of Fenris, the Volca Fenrica, the Space Wolves, the people of Fenris in general have been based off of the Scandinavians, just like the people of Chogoris, the White Scars, and the White Scars rather, because not everyone in Chogoris is a White Scar, obviously. Same goes for the Volca Fenrica and the people of Fenris. But the White Scars are also based ethnically, the people of Chogoris, in the Mongolians. And again, I'm not Mongolian. I'm not Scandinavian either. So I have literally no dog in this fight, no pun intended. But there has been a more and more instances in the lore where specifically Fenrisians, now this is where the lore gets complicated, because when Belisarius Cole introduces the new Primaris Space Marines into the Space Wolves, some of them do have darker skin, some of them, because he literally grabs them from all over the galaxy, but that's different. Some of them are from Fenris, but that's different. I'm talking about specifically Fenrisians that have an African ethnicity, or a descendant, they descend from an African ethnicity, or sub-Saharan descent, or whatever. And that, as much as nothing in the Space Wolves makes sense, that specifically doesn't make sense, because the one thing that made sense in the Space Wolves of, hey, why are they all space Vikings, space Scandinavians? Well, because their people have evolved for thousands of years so closely to acclimate themselves to that very specific ruthless planet where they have years-long winters at a time. And if you've ever read any of the Space Wolves books, it is a hellhole, a frozen wasteland, pretty much. Not wasteland, but a frozen hellhole to survive in Fenris. So they all evolved and even mutated in certain ways to acclimate themselves to that specific environment. Now I have ideas in my head of how that happened. Maybe they are the remnants of a Scandinavian-based civilization from before the Dark Age of technology, whatever, who just landed in the planet, and when the Dark Age of technology came to an end with the opening of the Eye of Terra and the birth of Slaanesh and all of that stuff, that's very deep lore. They just got stranded there, and perhaps it used to be a different society, a more racially diverse society, which managed to survive there with the assistance from the amazing technology that they used to have. But as the Dark Age of technology, so to speak, came to an end, and everyone descended immediately back into the Dark Ages, the Iron Age pretty much, everyone who didn't acclimate or mutate to survive in that climate just unfortunately died out. And I had this very similar idea with Chogoris, for example. And that's the thing with Warhammer lore, like, so many things don't make sense that you have to sort of make excuses for them. But again, my point is, if they added Mexican Space Wolves, I wouldn't feel represented. I wouldn't feel more attracted to Space Wolves just because they added Mexican Space Wolves. Now, that being said, if they added a Hispanic-based or, Hispanic ethnic influenced Space Marine chapter, would I like that? Yes, I would like it. So long as it just doesn't destroy the established lore. Which I could give you many examples like that. I hope I wrote here a few. Perhaps I didn't. But specifically speaking, let me see how long this video has been, because I don't want to keep you guys here for too long. I am aware that I do ramble a lot. Okay, 45 minutes. It's already longer than I expected it to be. So I do apologize for that. I do have a lot of things in my head right now regarding this specific topic, because I don't want this universe that I love so much to go the way of Star Wars. And just, the issue is not whether it's the new Star Wars things are good or bad. The really hurtful thing is I don't really know anyone who actually cares anymore. I grew up in a world where a lot of my friends were very inspired they were in love with Star Wars. It was a generational thing, and we would go to conventions and we would have fun, and we were just engaged with the stories and whatever. And some of them, of course, grew out of it. The ones who weren't perhaps autistic like me, but I didn't until they destroyed it. Disney came with a hammer and just destroyed it. I'm not saying I hated everything ever since, but what really hurts me about it is that people just don't care enough. I personally just don't care enough anymore. And when GW comes and just changes things like that in the lore with no good reason, again, not out of a creative necessity, not out of a narrative purpose, but just to appease the political and social climate of people who perhaps didn't even like their hobby in the first place. Again, I go back to my point. If you don't like the hobby enough that you need it to be changed to appease your specific ideologies, then it's not the hobby for you. And I'm sorry, like, someone has to say this. That's another issue that has been happening a lot, specifically since the introduction of the Primarchs and the Space Marines. Whereas the primary Space Marines, narratively there was a lot of potential there. There have been a lot of cool stories that have come out of it, but there has also been a dark side to that. And that is that these people that are coming back to the present time in Warhammer, like the primary Space Marines who were kept from an older age, from the Horus Heresy, and woken up all of a sudden 10,000 years later in the 41st millennium, and the Primarchs who just disappeared for different reasons. Gilliman was held in stasis. The Lion, we don't even know where he was, because who cares? It's not even important, right, GW? He just appears because we need to sell the Lion model. He comes back, and I've noticed this more and more in the books, they all criticize the setting. And they start to change the setting little by little. And they say, yeah, this setting sucks. This setting that we woke up in 10,000 years later sucks. And what they're actually saying is the setting that you fans have been enjoying for the past few decades suck. We're going to change it. We're going to make it better with our modern values. But our modern values were never applied to this setting. That was the magic of it. It was space fantasy. And there's value in that. There's value in engaging your imagination into something completely different, into a universe completely different from the one, not completely, but just different from the ones that you existing with different values. Because in the specific case of Warhammer, sure, people have very different values. I have a computer and not a servitor with me, which I'm glad of. I wouldn't like to have a tortured prisoner converted into a computer instead of my trustworthy PC, although I do keep it with purity seals just in case. But my point is, thank God it's a different, thank the Emperor, it's a different setting. it's so alien to us, but that's also what makes it cool. And what the authors at Black Library and what the heads of the GW that want these changes to take place, perhaps more likely than not, to make it more appeasable to a broader audience, is saying, they're saying, yeah, that setting is dumb. Let's make it cooler. Let's make it more chill, so that people can enjoy it more. And I was having this discussion with someone else the other day on Twitter. It was a Warhammer 40k meme account, I don't even know why I follow meme accounts anymore. Sometimes I find it funny. I just think Warhammer memes are way too many now. But regardless, and this person made a meme saying, "Oh yeah, the Lord of Warhammer won't be softened because it becomes more mainstream, right?" And I said, "No, it already has become a lot more soft, a lot more vanilla, a lot more more myth." And he asked me for examples, and I gave him some examples, and he absolutely lost his bananas. He went bananas on me. So that's neither here nor there, but my point is, this is already happening. And some people are liking it, some people are not even realizing that this is happening. Regardless of where you stand in this, I can only sort of nudge you to saying, hey, take a moment to understand why this setting is so famous. Perhaps not famous as in mainstream, but well, now it is. But why for so many years people engaged so strongly with this setting? Why we like the grim darkness? I know it's weird. I know it can be depressing. So why do you think people like it? And if you don't like it necessarily the way it is, I'm not saying it can't improve. I'm not saying it can't progress. I'm not saying it cannot be narratively better. It definitely can. There's a lot of room for it. But it seldom happens. It often just goes backwards by trying to impose new contemporary, let's say, values into a universe that is not there for that. That was attractive in the first place because of how alien it was. And once again, I repeat, and yet, even in such an alien setting, such a strange, grim universe, we made connections to characters. We made connections to their struggles, and that is fun. But when people come like that and saying like, oh, I'm not represented enough, my values don't feel represented enough, my ethnicity is not represented enough, my gender is not represented enough in this, we have to change it so that I can appreciate it. Well, that there might be examples of when that was actually true. I don't know. I can't think of one right now, and this video is too long to start going down the rabbit hole. But perhaps you can tell me down in the comments just how you feel about it. But in my experience, that just makes things worse. So yeah, again, I think I've been clear enough on this, but I don't mind female representation in the narrative of Warhammer or in the miniatures. I do feel like there should be more female factions, or factions that have more female characters. I do like the ones that there are. By all means, there should be more. By all means, if you want to make something that is attractive to women, bring it in. Just don't go and change something that was traditionally attractive to men for a very specific reason. And that's not to say that women didn't collect custodes. I'm sure women collected custodes before the change, regardless. But if you're going to make that change, make it make sense. Same with the primaries. The primaries, I'm sorry, don't make sense, but that's a huge other topic of conversation that I don't want to go down on. down to, I guess. So yeah, basically at this point in the video, this is where I just take my hat off, my ranting hat off, and just ask for your opinion. What do you think? Do you like these changes? Do you think they were handled perfectly? Do you think they should have been handled better? But do you like what they did? All things considered, do you think I'm just completely wrong on all things basically, or what do you think I'm wrong in? Or do you actually don't like it? Do you agree with me? Or do you agree with me for different reasons? Whatever your feelings are on this, I would love to read it down below here in the comments. And if you want to have more of these conversations, again, it's the hobby guard, not because I want to gatekeep the hobby, but I want to guard our time and how we value and how we love and how we enjoy it, and the amazing moments that we live just engaging with these hobbies, and the amazing friendships that we develop. I have friends of all the genders and all the ethnicities and different values and ideologies and whatever, and it's usually a blast to sit down to play with them. Even if we all appreciate the hobby for different reasons, for different ways, I have my own view of things. I'm not asking you to take on it, but I did want to share it. And I did want to entice people to, perhaps before ranting about why things are the way they are and demanding change, perhaps take a moment to try to appreciate why people already used to like things the way they were. Anyways, I realize that I haven't expressed myself perfectly in this video. It is the holidays and I am still working and I am tired, but I did want to put a video out today. So if you want to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe. Well, you won't see too many more videos like this, because the idea is that it will eventually get a lot better. So that's why I'm uploading so much, because I really need the practice. I want to talk faster, more clear, less rambly, and this channel will become amazing in the future, because right now it might not be, but the idea is fucking great. So, oh, there goes there goes the algorithm again, completely hiding my video. Regardless, I would love to have you along the ride. So please, here you can, in this channel, you can give your opinion of how you would like to change it or whatever. So please comment down below and like and subscribe if you want to support me, and see you on the next one at Astra.